He thought the past was buried on a battlefield half a world away. But when a young waitress leaned in to refill his coffee, a silver tag slipped from her neck and time stopped. How did she end up wearing the name of the man who died in his arms? The bell over the door gave a tired jingle as David Madsen stepped into the dusty little diner just off I-80. The same one he'd been coming to every Sunday for nearly 12 years. Same hour, same booth, same black coffee, poured without asking. He moved slow these days, arthritis in the knees, a back that never quite forgave him for decades on the road, but he liked it that way. It was predictable and quiet. His boots thudded gently on the linoleum as he made his way to the corner booth, the one with the cracked leather seat and the chipped formica table. From that spot, he could see the parking lot, the highway beyond the fuel station. He lowered himself into the seat with a soft grunt and nodded at the waitress behind the counter. Not the usual girl. This one was new, young, maybe early 20s, with a bright ponytail and sleeves rolled up past her elbows. She moved like someone who wasn't quite sure if she belonged yet. David figured she was probably just filling in. A moment later, she approached, holding the glass pot with a nervous smile. "Good morning. Coffee?" David nodded once. "Black." She leaned in to pour, careful not to spill. And that's when it happened. The chain around her neck shifted, and something metallic slipped free from beneath her collar, clinking softly against her name tag as it dangled into view. David froze. A silver dog tag. Standard issue. Clean but worn. And on it, engraved in military caps, Thompson Eli J. March 12, 1949, David's heart stuttered. The mug in his hand trembled. He hadn't seen that name in over 50 years. His breath caught, eyes locked on the tag like it was some kind of ghost. His chest felt tight. The sound of the diner seemed to vanish. All he could hear was the crunch of jungle underfoot, distant shouts, the thump of helicopter blades, and the dying breath of a young man trying to make a joke about pancakes while his blood soaked into David's shirt. "You okay, sir?" David blinked. The waitress, Katie, her tag said, was looking at him, concerned. He cleared his throat. "Sorry. That tag. Where'd you get it?" She touched it instinctively. "Oh, this? It was my uncle's. He died in Vietnam. I never knew him, but my mom kept it in a box and gave it to me a few years ago. Said it might bring luck." She smiled faintly. "Not sure it's working yet." David stared at her. "Eli Thompson?" Her eyes widened. "Yeah. How did you?" He couldn't speak. He just nodded toward the seat across from him. Katie hesitated, glancing around at the empty diner. Then she slid into the booth, curiosity overtaking her shift. David took a long breath. "I was with him, in Vietnam. I was there when he—" The words felt like rocks scraping his throat. "You knew him?" "I was the last person he spoke to." Katie's expression softened. "What was he like?" "No one really talks about him. My mom said he was funny, that he wanted to open a restaurant or something." David closed his eyes. "Yeah, a roadside cafe. He said after the war he'd come home, open one near the highway, sell pancakes, real syrup. Said truckers would keep him in business." A faint smile touched his face, broken and worn. "He talked about it all the time." Katie leaned in. "What happened?" David hesitated. For decades, he'd kept it locked away out of guilt or grief or just survival. But now, staring at this girl who carried Eli's memory around her neck, he felt something shift. Maybe the silence had lasted long enough. "We were ambushed. Eli got hit when he tried to pull a wounded kid back behind cover. He didn't make it. But before he went, he made me promise I'd tell his family he wasn't scared. That he went out cracking jokes about pancakes and bad coffee." Katie covered her mouth, tears welling up. "He never came home. They just got a telegram. My grandfather wouldn't let anyone talk about it." David reached into his jacket and pulled out a weathered wallet. Inside, folded carefully, was an old photo. It showed two young Marines, one grinning wide, the other giving a mock salute. He slid it across the table. "That's us. Christmas, '68. Katie picked it up with reverence. "That's him," she whispered. "That's my Uncle Eli." They sat there for a long moment. Just two people, separated by decades, joined by a chain of memory and loss. The coffee went cold. The noise of the diner faded back into the background. Would you tell my mom?" Katie asked softly. She was just a kid when he left. I think she needs to hear it. David nodded slowly. I'd like that. She smiled through her tears. Thank you. He looked at the tag around her neck again, shimmering in the morning light. No, he said gently. Thank you. The next morning, David stood in the center of his garage, the air thick with the smell of oil and old wood. Dust floated in the streaks of sunlight pouring through the small window. Against the far wall, tucked behind stacked boxes of truck parts and forgotten tools, sat a dented army footlocker. Green paint chipped, the metal rusted around the latches. He hadn't opened it since the funeral of his last surviving platoon member, almost a decade ago. His hands trembled slightly as he undid the clasps. The lid creaked open, and with it, a flood of memories surged forth. Inside lay a folded American flag, brittle photos, a canteen, and a bundle of letters tied with faded twine. Beneath it all was a sealed envelope, yellowed with time, with Linda Thompson written in neat block letters. David stared at the name. Linda, Eli's little sister, 10 years old when he died. He sat on the workbench, the letter in his lap, letting the silence settle. The words inside hadn't changed, but the world had. He remembered writing it. Eli's last message, dictated with a bloody hand on David's shoulder, gasping between shudders. The way Eli had tried to keep things light, calling her Peanut, telling her to keep being a pain to their dad and to grow up tough. David had promised to deliver the words himself, but never did. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he'd been too afraid to see her face. But now, after 50 years, she was asking without knowing. And David realized he couldn't let her go another day without knowing who her brother really was. By the following Sunday, David was waiting at the diner before it even opened. The air was cool and quiet. He clutched the envelope in one hand, his knuckles white. When Katie arrived, she was surprised to see him standing outside. I didn't think I'd see you this early, she said, unlocking the door. David just nodded. I needed to talk to you before your shift. Inside, the diner was silent. Chairs still stacked on tables. The smell of bleach lingered from the night cleaning. They sat in David's usual booth, and he placed the envelope gently between them. This is for your mom, he said. Katie looked down. Is that from him? David hesitated, then nodded. I wrote it, but it's his words. She ran her fingers along the edge of the paper. She doesn't talk about him much. I think she was too young. Or maybe they didn't let her. Grief does that, David said quietly. Sometimes silence is the only way people know how to carry it. Katie nodded, then looked at him with searching eyes. Will you tell me more about him? I want to know. They sat there as David shared what he remembered. Not just the battle, but the man. Eli, the practical joker who carved his name into mess hall trays. The one who always volunteered for kitchen duty because he wanted to master pancake recipes before opening his dream diner. How he kept spirits up by sketching future blueprints on ration boxes and promising free meals for every member of the squad once they were home. David smiled as he remembered Eli doodling menus under artillery fire. He used to say, "No war stories allowed at my counter. Just bacon and bad jokes." Katie laughed. Sounds like the kind of place I'd want to work. Then David's expression shifted, a shadow falling over his features. There's something else, he said slowly. Eli, he could have made it out. Katie tilted her head. We were overrun. We had a medevac chopper inbound. But one of our guys, Collins, was hit bad and stuck. Eli crawled out under fire to drag him back in. That's when he took the shot. He didn't scream, didn't even flinch. He just looked at me and said, "Guess pancakes will have to wait." Katie pressed her fingers to her lips, overwhelmed. He saved Collins, David continued. And he saved me too in more ways than one. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Katie broke the silence. You said you wrote to her right after? David looked down. I tried, but I couldn't bring myself to send it. I didn't think I deserved to tell her. I wasn't fast enough, strong enough. She reached across the table and laid her hand on his. But you were there, and you remembered. That's more than we've ever had. Later that afternoon, back in the diner kitchen, Katie approached Meredith, the owner. The older woman was slicing tomatoes with her usual no-nonsense precision. Hey, Meredith, could I ask you something? Meredith glanced up. Sure, sugar. What's on your mind? Do you remember a soldier named Eli Thompson? Served in Vietnam. Meredith paused. Her eyes softened. I do. My late husband knew the family. Sad story. Their boy died in action. Parents never talked about it again. Linda was just a little girl back then. Katie hesitated. Would you be okay if we brought in a little display? A photo? Maybe a story? Just for the booth. Meredith leaned on the counter, studying her. That David fella tell you about him? Katie nodded. Well, Meredith said slowly, he's never talked about the war, but if he's opening up, yeah, I think that'd be just fine. She handed Katie a key. There's an old bulletin board in the back closet. Dust it off. It's yours. That evening, Katie stood in her childhood home's kitchen, clutching the envelope. Her mother, Linda, stood across from her, arms folded, unsure. Where did you get this? She asked softly. A man gave it to me, Katie said. His name is David Madsen. He served with Uncle Eli. He was with him at the end. Linda's face paled. Her hand reached for the envelope, but she didn't open it. Instead, she sat down slowly, her lips parted. No one ever told me how he died, she whispered. Not really, just that it was sudden, that he was brave. Katie sat beside her. He was. David said he saved someone, and he made jokes until the very end. Linda's hand trembled as she turned the envelope over. I was 10 when he left. He promised to send me postcards from Saigon. Katie gave a gentle smile. He sent you something better. They sat in silence as Linda began to open the letter. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves across the driveway. Inside, the past was finally beginning to speak. Linda sat motionless at her kitchen table, the letter unfolded in her hands, eyes frozen on the first lines of handwriting. Neat, blocky, unmistakably military, but shaky in parts. David's penmanship had survived time, but the weight of the words pressed fresh. Katie sat silently across from her, watching her mother relive something she'd never truly known. The late afternoon sun spilled through the curtains, striping the letter in bands of gold and shadow. Linda's lips moved as she read, Hey Peanut, if you're reading this, I guess I didn't make it. That's okay. I want you to know I wasn't scared. Not really. Mostly, I was mad I never got to come home and teach you how to drive that rust bucket wagon Mom bought. I hope you're still bossing everyone around and drawing on the walls like a tiny dictator. She stopped, a laugh catching in her throat, quickly swallowed by a sob. Tell Dad I know he meant well, even if he never said it. Tell Mom I still think her meatloaf was suspicious. I kept thinking right to the end about opening that cafe. Near the highway, you know? Big windows, real maple syrup, and the best damn pancakes this country's ever seen. The words blurred in her vision. Her hand trembled as she reached the final line. Be kind, be loud, live big, and if you ever meet a guy named Madsen, he's good people. Love you always, Eli. Linda dropped her head into her hands. He called me Peanut, she whispered, her voice cracking. No one's called me that since. She didn't finish. Katie reached across the table and gripped her hand. Mom, she said softly. He never stopped thinking about you. Linda wiped her cheeks, trying to recompose herself. I need to see him. David. Katie hesitated. He's nervous. He didn't think he deserved to bring you the letter. Linda shook her head. He was with my brother when he died. That makes him family. The next Sunday, the diner was buzzing more than usual. After church crowd, truckers rolling in early, coffee flowing nonstop. David sat in his booth, stiff as a board. He hadn't touched his coffee. His eyes kept drifting toward the front door. Then it opened. Katie came in first. Behind her, a woman in her early 60s, shoulders square, expression uncertain, walked with slow, deliberate steps. Linda wore a denim jacket, hair pulled back in a loose twist, and clutched the envelope in her hand like a fragile relic. When David stood, their eyes met. Mrs. Thompson, he said quietly. Linda, she corrected, voice steady but soft. Please. He gave a small nod. Linda. They sat across from each other, the space between them heavy with decades of silence. Katie lingered nearby but didn't interrupt. Meredith, watching from behind the counter, turned the music down and gave them space. I read the letter, Linda said. It was beautiful and funny, just like him. David nodded. He made me promise I'd write it, and that I'd tell you what really happened. Linda's hands tightened around the letter. Why didn't you come sooner? David hesitated. Because I was ashamed. I lived. He didn't. And that never felt fair. She looked him in the eye. But you remembered. You carried this. That means something. David reached into his jacket again and pulled out the photo he had shown Katie, the same black and white shot of him and Eli. I think he would have liked to be remembered like this, he said. Not in uniform, not in a casket, just smiling, dreaming about pancakes. Linda smiled through her tears. He always wanted to feed people. Said it was how he showed love. Katie stepped forward. He still can. They both looked at her, confused. We've been working on something, she said, motioning toward the corner of the diner. In the far booth where David always sat, the walls had been freshly painted. A small wooden frame hung beside the window, holding Eli's photo and a typed copy of his letter. Below it, a new menu card was clipped to the table. Eli's pancake special, all smiles, no war stories, served with maple syrup and bad jokes on request. Linda covered her mouth. You did this. David gave a slow smile. She did, but I think it's perfect. Katie smiled, but her eyes were glistening. It's a start. Later that afternoon, Linda asked David to walk with her to the town's small cemetery. The sky was overcast, the breeze gentle. They stood side by side before Eli's gravestone. Gray marble, simple engraving, never visited much over the years. Linda crouched down, brushing away some leaves. Then she placed the dog tag on the stone and laid the letter beside it. He finally came home, she whispered. David stood in silence, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny folded napkin. Inside, a single patch, faded red thread on olive green. It read Thompson. I took it from his jacket, David said. I've kept it all these years. I think it's time it goes back to him. He placed it gently beside the dog tag. Linda looked at him. You were his brother, too. Not by blood, but you were. David nodded, eyes wet. We all were. Over there. They stood a while longer, the silence between them finally peaceful. As they turned to leave, Linda touched David's arm. You said he wanted to build a cafe. David nodded. Well, she said, I think he just did. Through you and Katie. Through all of this. David didn't reply. He just smiled, deep, tired, and full of something like peace. The changes to the diner started small, almost invisible at first. Katie hung Eli's framed photo in the booth permanently. Linda returned a week later with an old Polaroid of Eli as a teenager, arms around a grinning 10-year-old version of herself, both covered in flour. That one went up too, right beneath the glass. Then came a shadow box with his medals, a bronze star, a purple heart, and a small folded flag from a drawer that had stayed shut for decades. Meredith didn't say much about the additions. She simply wiped the counter a little more carefully each day and brewed the coffee stronger. But what truly changed was the atmosphere. Customers started asking questions. The regulars, mostly truckers, retirees, and locals, noticed the photos and the story Katie had typed and laminated under the glass. Soon, others began to leave mementos. A navy cap, a faded photograph, pocket Bible with a name etched in cursive. The booth, once David's solitary place, had become something bigger, a living memory wall for those who never made it home. And through it all, David kept coming. But he didn't sit alone anymore. One morning, Katie greeted David at the door with a bright grin. You've got a visitor, she said, nodding toward the booth. Sitting there, fidgeting with the laminated menu, was a wiry man in his 70s. He had a cane leaning against the wall, a USMC ring on his finger, and eyes that instantly narrowed with recognition when David approached. Collins. David blinked. The man stood, chuckling. Took you long enough. They embraced stiffly, awkward but sincere. Two men bound by a moment of terror from a lifetime ago. Collins was the soldier Eli had saved, the one Eli died protecting. I read the story in the VFW newsletter, Collins said. Saw the photo. Couldn't believe it. Had to come see for myself. David nodded slowly. I'm glad you did. Collins looked around the booth, then lowered his voice. I owe you both. You and Eli. David shook his head. You don't owe us. You lived. That's what matters. Collins swallowed. I've tried to make it count. I really have. You did, David said. You're here. That afternoon, after Collins had gone, David wandered into the back lot of the diner. The sun was just starting to dip, casting orange light across the gravel and weeds. A row of broken picnic tables sat in the shade of a bent oak tree. Katie followed him out, holding 2 mugs of coffee. I'm thinking of fixing this place up, she said, handing him one. David raised an eyebrow. Out back. Yeah, she said. A little side patio, outdoor seating. Maybe even build a real pancake station for the weekends. You know, Eli's spot. He looked around, imagining it. String lights hanging between the trees, a small griddle sizzling, people laughing and eating under the stars. You'll need someone who knows how to run a place like that, he said. Katie gave him a playful glance. You volunteering? David chuckled. You don't want an old coot like me handling a grill. Maybe not, she said. But I could use someone to help me write the menu. He tilted his head. You gonna name it after him? Katie nodded. The section out back? I'm calling it Eli's Cafe. It's what he wanted. He never got the chance. But we do. David smiled, deep and genuine. He'd like that. 2 weeks later, the back lot was transformed. Volunteers came from town. Veterans. Customers. Even Meredith's grandson brought in tools and helped pour gravel. They built tables, planted flowers, hung lights, and painted signs. Katie commissioned a small wooden plaque for the entrance. Eli's Cafe, pancakes, peace, and stories that matter. The grand opening was informal. No press, no stage, just a community gathering around old recipes and older memories. David gave the first toast, standing awkwardly on the back step, holding a plastic cup of orange juice. I spent a long time trying to forget the war, he said. But what I learned is this: memory isn't the enemy. Silence is. He looked over at Linda, who stood beside Katie, tears shining in her eyes. Eli was a soldier, yes, but he was also a dreamer, a little brother, a pancake artist. And I think he'd be damn proud to see what you've all built here. There was laughter, clapping, and then silence, respectful and full, as Eli's letter was read aloud once more. This time it felt different. This time it felt complete. As dusk settled and the crowd thinned, David remained behind. He sat alone at the back table, the one with a fresh vase of flowers and a tiny American flag. Katie joined him, wiping her hands on her apron. I think he'd approve, she said. David looked up at the sky, where the first stars had begun to appear. He's probably complaining about the syrup. Katie smiled. Real maple. No substitutes. They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that feels safe, earned. Then David reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out something small. A silver ring with the Marine emblem, scuffed and weathered. He gave me this the night before he died, David said. Said I should keep it safe in case he didn't make it back. He handed it to her. Katie took it slowly, reverently. Are you sure? He wanted it to go home, David said. And I think this place is finally home. A week later, travelers along I-80 began to take notice of the little diner with the string lights in the back and the new sign by the road. Meredith's Diner, home of Eli's Cafe. Truckers pulled in curious, expecting just coffee. They stayed for the stories. The booth with the photos always had someone in it, reading, remembering, sometimes just sitting quietly. And on weekends, the outdoor cafe served pancakes with handwritten notes tucked under the plates, sharing stories submitted by veterans and their families. David still came every Sunday, still sat in his booth. But now he wasn't a man mourning alone. He was a keeper of memories, a bridge between past and present. And the cafe that Eli dreamed of, half a world away, on jungle nights filled with hope and fear, had finally opened its doors. Not made of brick and glass, but of stories, forgiveness, and the kind of love that survives everything, even war. This story reminds us that some wounds never heal until they're shared. What would you have done in David's place? Would you open old scars to bring someone peace? If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more human stories from Embrace the Journey.